on? Yeah. Now it's on? Oh. Yeah, welcome everyone. I think we give the last people the chance to sit down. This is very loud now. So welcome to you all, to the audience here, as well as the audience on the live stream. One of the few good things that came out of the pandemic. My name is Tobias Blanke. I work at Ruha, and I will be your chair tonight. Don't worry. It's a good start. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight. So I'm sure you're as excited as me to welcome tonight's exciting speakers about this event, about the book Viral Justice. And normally you would expect me to say this as a chair, that they are great, but I definitely in this moment I feel quite small and humble being in the presence of these two wonderful intellectuals whose work has been inspiration to all of us, I think. Our main speaker tonight is Ruha Benjamin. Welcome. She is professor in the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. And she's very well known for her studies of science, technology, and medicine. She's the founding director of the Ida Wells Just Data Lab and the faculty associate in the Center for Information Technology Policy, the program on history of science, program on gender and sexuality studies, and my personal favorite, of course, she's on the executive committee for the Center for Digital Humanities in Princeton. So her work addresses, as you know, debates about science and society, and how technology and society are shaped here, and how we can critically engage with both. She is a prolific author whose sharp scientific analysis is matched by her beautiful writing style, if I may say that, which is not often the case. And today we discuss her latest book. Oh, it's, quite dry sometimes to be a scientist. Today we discuss her latest book, Viral Justice, How We Grow the World We Want, which came out with Princeton University Press in 2022. I'm sure you also all remember her other two books. The first one, of course, People Science, Bodies and Rights on the Stem Cell Frontier from Stanford University Press in 2013, which is this is how you do science and technology studies of stem cell research, I would say. And if I read this book correctly, it's still very much the inspiration of what you're currently doing, yeah, in part. But of course, it's no exaggeration to say that her second book, Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code, which came out with Polity in 2019, is one of those few intellectual inventions that really set the scene and created maybe a whole new scientific inquiry. We are taken on a whirlwind journey how seemingly neutral technologies continue racism and encode discrimination. And then we have Professor Senai Hebriab, who everybody knows who works at UVA. He's, well, at least I do, studied artificial systems in the 1990s, and then he combined his interest in artificial systems with neural systems, and later on with social systems. He's a very interdisciplinary scholar, so an example to all of us in this case. He combines scientific fields, several scientific fields, research and education, science and society engagement. Currently, Senai is professor of socially intelligent AI, program director of the MSc Data Science and Information Systems, and that's not a small feat from what I know from that degree, it's quite large. And of course, most of you will know him as one of the founding directors, one of the founders, and the current scientific director of the Civic AI Lab, which we're all very proud of at UVA. I think it's quite a unique, globally unique collaboration between the Ministry of Interior Affairs, the City of Amsterdam, the Free University of Amsterdam, and the University of Amsterdam to develop AI technology that increase equal opportunities in several society fields, such as health, I think, education, and several others that I forgot now about. But what I also can really recommend is his media appearances. He's also a prolific media speaker. For those who speak Dutch, I can highly recommend his recent interview with the Volkskrant, where he elaborates on all the wonderful actions and thoughts he has. And now we start with a presentation by Ruha, and then Senai will have the chance to answer.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to be here, literally getting off the train and walking over to this space. I'm always so honored when people show up to anything, but especially when you can actually see what else you could be doing out the window. And so it just makes me feel like all the nerds in one place. Thank you for coming. I couldn't think of anyone who I would rather be in conversation with than my wonderful brother scholar, Sinai Gebrieb, and also our wonderful moderator today, Tobias Blanque. So thank you all for coming. This is a very different project from what you may be used to with Race After Technology or other work. It's what my press calls a mix of memoir and manifesto. And you'll see in my short comments this evening what that looks like, what that feels like as a kind of trailer for the book. So all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The words of Octavia E. Butler, which essentially is the heartbeat of the project, of the book. It's what I want you to take away from it. It is the epigraph. It's the first words that you'll read when you open it. And so in my mind, we can all go home now, because that is what we need to know. So the book starts like this. I grew up in the White House. At least that's what the sign on the front door says. This is the White House in South Central Los Angeles. It's where my grandparents, the Whites, planted roots after fleeing the Jim Crow South. And although this was the side of LA where even the palm trees looked exhausted, in my mind, the entire world revolved around our block. School bells ringing, police helicopters circling, music vibrating from the apartments next door, and my grandma holding court in the kitchen. There in that house, under Grandma White's roof, was where I first caught fire, as in the poem, Catch the Fire, by Sonia Sanchez. I say, where is your fire? I say, where is your fire? You got to find it and pass it on. You got to find it and pass it on. From you to me, from me to her, from her to him, from the brother to the sister, from the father to the mother. I say, where is your fire? Can't you smell it coming out of our past? The fire of living, not dying. The fire of loving, not killing. Where is our beautiful fire that gave light to the world? Walking, singing, building, laughing, learning, loving, teaching, being. Here is my hand. Catch the fire and live, 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 live. Catch the Fire by Sonia Sanchez. There in that house under Grandma White's roof was where I first experienced mercy, as in the poem Mercy by Nikki Giovanni. She asked me to kill the spider. Instead, I got the most peaceful weapons I can find. I got a cup and a napkin. I catch the spider, put it outside, and allow it to walk away. If I am ever caught in the wrong place, at the wrong time, just being alive, not bothering anyone, I hope I am greeted with the same kind of mercy. Mercy by Nikki Giovanni. There in that house under Grandma White's roof was where I first experienced love, as in the poem L-O-V-E by Ursula Rucker. On this day, there will be no talk of war or politic or disaster or death. Love is alive today. So we will speak only of love. There will be only love on tongue and lip and in heart and thought. And it won't be that Hollywood type of love. No, not TV love, not dime store novel love, and certainly not mainstream music love. 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 You know, love. Love that has been worked on like gardens and term papers. Love that has been nurtured like children. And well, like children, love that falls, crashes even, burns, but dusts off fixes up and rises, rises more brilliant than before. Phoenix love, yeah, Phoenix love. So let us speak only of love, healing love, no herbal over-the-counter love, real healing love, like God love, like mother's love, lover's love, child's love, like best friend love, and change the world love, humans love. Love soft, love hard, but just love. Enjoy this new garden, work on it together, and it will be perennial. It will grow year to year. It will be beautiful. It will win blue ribbons and everything. Folks will come from far and wide just to see it and wish they had it, had this kind of garden, this kind of love. That's Love by Ursula Rucker. I start with poetry because poetry reminds us that creating a just world requires more than new policies and laws, but a new poetics, by which I mean creative care and attention to how we treat and value one another. I start with poetry because poetry is easy to underestimate, the same way it is easy to underestimate how our individual actions and decisions can shape the world around us. Sitting next to a 3-inch tomb of a book, a poem appears frivolous and slight. But a poem can slice into your insides and open you up to the world like 1,000 footnotes never could. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that something almost undetectable can be deadly, and that we can transmit it without even knowing. Doesn't this imply that small things, seemingly minor actions, decisions, habits, could have exponential effects in the other direction, affirming life, fostering well-being, invigorating society? This attention to seemingly small actions is what I'm thinking of as viral justice, because of how this virus is teaching me to respect the microscopic. The point is, we cannot wait for top-down change or those who monopolize power and resources to save us. We have to start right in our own backyards, or front yards for that matter, remembering that grassroots can literally mean working in the grass. So this is what it looked like in front of my grandma's house when I was growing up. These grassy patches running along the sidewalks all over LA are what they call parkways. But now, some of these dry patches look like this, overflowing with edible gardens, thanks to Ron Finley, AKA the gangster gardener. Longtime resident of South Central, place he describes as home to the drive-through and the drive-by. But Finley and friends are changing that, one plot at a time. At first, the city cited him and threatened to issue a warrant for his arrest, reminding us how law enforcement is so often used as a blunt and violent tool to address pressing issues. What if we got to the roots of the problems instead? Eventually, Finley and supporters got the city to change the law that prevented people from growing edible landscapes. Now, he and a team of volunteers at Green Grounds have planted over 20 urban gardens around the city. They also created a teaching garden to spread knowledge about organic farming, with the aim of also creating jobs for local residents. Growing your own food is like printing your own money, Finley likes to say. So, what I am calling viral justice orients us differently towards small-scale, often localized actions. It invites us to witness how an idea or action that sprouts in one place may be adopted, adapted, and diffused elsewhere. But it also counters this assumption that scaling up should always be the goal. Whereas the gangster gardener is literally growing the world we want, there are world builders getting their hands dirty in many other ways. One of the examples that I end the book on takes us to the city of Seattle, where a growing group of residents from over 200 local organizations are focused on nearly microscopic changes in the city budget. Together, they're working on a range of issues, including housing for all, indigenous sovereignty, safe and affordable public transportation, digital equity, disability justice, and more. And like other examples I discuss, they are connecting what we don't need and what we do need, noting that the city spends 26 times more on policing than on climate. And their demand to stop police sweeps of homeless encampments is tied to the demand to invest in affordable housing throughout the city. The last I checked, the Seattle Solidarity Budget organizers successfully shrank the police budget 2 years in a row, while winning investments that center the city's most marginalized residents. By tearing down the silos across their many interests, they remind us that a budget is more than a budget. It's a moral document that states who and what we value. Even more, their work brings to life the fact that all of our struggles are interconnected, that we are interconnected, a beautiful poetics of living. As a world-building rubric, viral justice is forward-looking and inventive, asking, what if, while stubbornly invested in the here and now, demanding, why wait? What if we can architect a radically different existence? Why wait for these brutal, death-making structures to completely collapse before we start truly living? And so, the lens of viral justice encourages us to amplify, like a microscope would, seemingly small efforts and entice us to spread them. In the midst of multiple ongoing calamities, this work of crafting more caring social relations is not charity work, work to be done on behalf of others. Falling from a burning building, I might hit the ground first, but you won't be far behind. My well-being is intimately bound up with yours. So we don't need allies. We need everyone to smell the smoke. At the end of the day, I'm a student of the late, great Octavia E. Butler, writer and builder of speculative worlds. To the question, what is there to do? She once responded, I mean, there's no single answer that will solve all of our future problems. There's no magic bullet. Instead, there are thousands of answers. At least you can be one of them if you choose to be. We can be one of them if we choose. So I'm encouraging all of us to get our hands dirty, if not in the actual dirt like the gangster gardener, in many other ways, because this is messy work. But we each have to figure out what our plot is. Whether digging deep or sowing seeds far and wide, plotting is about questioning the scripts we've all been handed. It's about scheming with others, plotting to do and be otherwise for the collective good of all. With that, thank you for your attention, and I hand things over to my brother, Scholar Sinan.
Yes, there it goes. Welcome all. And especially welcome to you, Ruha and Sean. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to hear the things that you share with us. I know that this evening is about your new book, Viral Justice, but I will nevertheless start with your previous book, Race After Technology, in my response to your presentation and book. When 2 years ago, I launched the Civic iLab that Tobias just mentioned, I could not think of a person more suited than you to give the opening lecture at the launch. Your book, Race After Technology, which received a lot of positive reviews and won many awards that year, really deeply touched me. It impressed me. The lens through which you look at the world. there you go. So the lens through which you look at the world, your kaleidoscopic approach to analyzing all kinds of social phenomena. Also the impact that you address, the impact of emerging technologies, the perspective of the disadvantaged and marginalized in society, the way you include that in your books and your works, the poetic style in which you share your observations, your analysis, your findings. What you wrote in that book and the way you wrote it really deeply resonated with me. In the white spaces between the words that you write, between the sentences, the paragraphs that you write in Race After Technology, I vividly sensed, felt your empathy and your compassion for others, your authenticity, your sincerity, your generosity, your ability to reimagine a just society, but also your ability to inspire people to look forward, to engage them, to let them stand up and fight for the future they want. I was moved not only by the message of your book, Race After Technology, but also by the messenger, by you. As you write in your new book, Viral Justice, it's not simply the message that matters, but the messenger too, especially the sincerity of the messenger. And the impression that I had of you from reading Race After Technology was confirmed when I had the chance to interact with you last year at the tenor lecture, Human Values in AI, in Cambridge, and also at the associated conference, Critical Borders, Radical Revisions of AI. I saw you working with students and also with fellow researchers, fellow scholars at Cambridge. I saw you paying close attention to what they had to say. I also saw you responding to them in a way that is very thoughtful and eloquent. I also saw you guiding them gently and indeed sprinkling here and there drops of viral justice already then. So, and if you recall, in my response to your tenor lecture at Cambridge, I said the following. Your works is inspiring because you critically situate technology in its social, cultural, and historical context, while also precisely, meticulously reimagining a future in which technology serves as a catalyst for social change, and also for social justice. And I also said that more of this is needed, more engaged scholarship, bridging boundaries between scientific disciplines, between research and teaching, between science and society, and between the oppressed and the oppressor. So I'm extremely happy to see that more has come from you in the form of your new book, Viral Justice. And I'll be honest and say that Viral Justice resonates with me even more than Race and Technology did. Why? First, because it's a mix of memoirs and social analysis. And I really admire the way that you blend your personal and your professional experiences. I think it gives a very unique analytical depth that I rarely see. Thank you for that. Second, because more than Race After Technology, Viral Justice is forward-looking, providing hope, triggering imagination, activating people, spotlighting all kinds of practices of viral justice, no matter how insignificant they may seem. I think these are key for me, messages that I took from your book, messages that make me feel that this book is even more important than Race After Technology. So, you recently stated in an interview about your new book that you initially considered the title Viral Racism rather than Viral Justice. And in that same interview, you also emphasized that it's important to recognize what we stand for, and not only what we are against, that we should take things in our own matters instead of waiting for top-down change. And I must say, I cheered upon hearing this. This is exactly the shift in knowing, the shift in thinking, the shift in being that we need at this particular time in history where rapid, complex political, technological, ecological changes seem to not only isolate us, but also numb us. And as you say beautifully in Viral Justice, it's not about dystopia or utopia, it's about ustopia. I found that beautifully written. So, in your new book, I think well, your new book deserves to go viral. Because it, in my point of view, really addresses injustices that happen everywhere. Everywhere. And people in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, in Europe, frequently claim that injustices committed in the US or in the UK or elsewhere do not exist here. Or they say it's a different context and you cannot compare it to our situation here. That is true sometimes, but most of the times it is not. And to me, this book is a confirmation of the growing resemblance that I see between unfair practices in the US, Europe and other regions of the world that need our fullest attention. A key feature of Viral Justice, you write in your book, is looking at the conditions right under our own noses so that each of us can confront exploitation and injustices in our own backyards. And it is in that spirit that I try to connect injustices described in your book to injustices in my own backyards. Academia, the Dutch society, or the rethink society where I grew up in. And I ended up with a list of more than 100 connections. I summarized them here point by point across the different chapters. Too many to discuss today, most probably, unfortunately. But for now, let me single out 5 of them. In chapter 1, you make reference to former Prime Minister Theresa May's hostile environment policy. You write, this policy was rolled out in 2012 as a set of legal requirements and administrative practices designed to make living in Britain for a subset of migrants as burdensome as possible so that they voluntarily leave. Here in the Netherlands, in the past few months, almost 700 asylum seekers were kept sleeping in unclean and unsafe conditions outside a reception center for weeks. One Eritrean baby even died at the reception center at the peak of the chaos in what one of the humanitarian NGOs described as the perfect storm of poor government planning and housing crisis. Many accuse the Dutch government of willingly creating a hostile environment to scare off potential new asylum seekers. Referring to policing and punishment, in chapter 2 you write, almost every time I give a talk on this subject, I make a point not only to focus on top-down surveillance, a la big government, a la big tech, but also on the many forms of horizontal interpersonal surveillance, such as employment stalking each other or applicants. Earlier this year, in the documentary De Blauwe Familie, in Dutch, The Blue Family, cops and former cops spoke out about how they were bullied, harassed, and discriminated against because of their skin color or origin. The documentary prompted the Dutch police to make yet another statement on the need to act more strictly against racism and discrimination within the organization. Practice what you preach still proves to be a serious challenge for the Dutch police and for many other organizations, unfortunately. In chapter 3, you emphasize that rather than creating opportunities for all students, schools frequently serve as engines of inequality. You write, for black parents, school is a battleground where we expect to go to war for our children. I have 4 of them. Shown here. You cannot imagine how often I have been on the battlefield for them. Much like my parents did for me and for my sisters, the battles always started in first grade, when school kids in the Netherlands are subjected for the first time to a CITO-toets. This is a test supposedly objectively measuring a kid's knowledge, skills, and competencies. The CITO-toets, always resulted in low language scores for myself, but also now for my kids, and for many others who spoke multiple languages at home. And as a result, throughout elementary school, all of my kids, including myself back then, were labeled and treated as kids with language deficiencies. Even after they started excelling in language, maths, other subjects, even then. This picture was taken a few years ago at the graduation ceremony of my two oldest sons, who now both study here in Amsterdam and are enjoying life to the fullest. In chapter 4, you write that every industry is fueled by a variant of grind culture, that academia, like most workplaces, is fueled by anxiety and competition. It is, of course, no different here in the Netherlands. Published for Paris, temporary contracts for young lecturers, and so on, indeed often create an unhealthy and unsafe working environment. And the action group WO in Actie has been pushing for change in the past few years and fighting against increasing work pressure. We now have a new national recognition and reward program. It aims at creating room for everyone's talent by facilitating a wide diversity of possible career paths and profiles, by creating more opportunity for collaboration, and so on. But it remains to be seen if it truly makes room for everyone's talent, but also for everyone's health and well-being. In chapter 6, you interrogate trust as the fragile fiber that holds together our social fabric. You write, this is the power, like superpower invested in whiteness, as well as corporate and state power, to remain invisible when needed and to occupy all the space desired when they have something to gain. And this reminded me of the recent child benefit scandal here in the Netherlands. The AI system of the Dutch tax office falsely flagged tens of thousands of parents and caregivers for child benefit fraud, mostly people from ethnic minority groups or low-income families. And for years, they were discriminated and chased after by the Dutch authorities. While the scandal brought down the Dutch government, the details of the AI system and the data used are still not made visible. The absence of accountability and transparency is fueling further distrust in the Dutch government by parts of the Dutch population. I'm almost there. However, so I mentioned a number of issues, injustices in the Netherlands. But I think that viral justice does not only deserve to go viral because of this, but also because of it addressing a universal, because also it spotlights universal practices aimed at moving us away from an unfair society toward a more equitable future. You give many examples of these practices in your book, Ruha, practices that are much needed here too, and to some extent are already happening here. For example, at Stichting Boost, of which I am a proud chairman of. Stichting Boost is a place here in Amsterdam, a physical place, a building where refugees can connect with other refugees and with locals for a soft landing. It is a place where they can devote time, their time, easy time, to learn the language, focus on health, sport, music, food, art, joy, sorrow, insecurity, resilience, thinking about their past, thinking about their future. I've always described Boost as a place where ordinary magic happens. And ordinary magic is a term coined by Anne Maston, a professor at the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota, and known for her research on the development of resilience among children and families facing adversity. Anne argues that in order to build resilience, all children need are the right environments, the right relationships, and the right chances to be able to safely explore themselves and the world around them. It's the ordinary that does the magic. I often refer to ordinary magic when people ask me how, in times of adversity, I remain hopeful about the future. And from now on, I will refer people also to viral justice. Ordinary magic, viral justice. Doesn't that sound inspiring? Ruha, I'm happy that you are here today to do some magic and to sprinkle drops of viral justice over us. Thank you.
Okay, we will now continue with the conversation. And I think we will also give some time later for some audience questions. So I think actually my questions fit very nicely with what you just said, Sanai. So my first one is because I don't think we often have the opportunity actually to have such outstanding scholars in so different fields sitting together on a podium. So in AI and in humanities. And we just heard this collaboration is not just by random tonight, sondern we have worked together for a while now. So what kind of shared interests brought you together?
Well, just 2 words, a just future. That's. I mean, I could not summarize it more concise than this. I think that's what I try to refer in my talk. Looking at the future, shaping the future, taking ownership in taking that future is what I think binds us. And there are 1,000 ways to that. There's no just one single way. I do it my way. I see Ruha doing it in her way. But the directions, it resonates with me. And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sanai reached out initially around the launch of the Civic AI Lab, right? And I think he was one of the first people that I saw really carving out this space for what some people call public interest technology, but where it was this combination of a critical and creative approach to the data sciences, to digital futures, where it wasn't only the critique looking at the harms, it wasn't only kind of like the artistic mode, which, you know, there's many artists now really experimenting beautifully with the digital tools, but it was really thinking about how to put these tools in service to the local, regional communities specifically focused on migrant health and justice. And so it was something that really inspired me to see what he was creating here as a model, I think, for many other parts of the world that are maybe more in one of those domains or the other.
And then you met again in Cambridge, is that correct? Or at what was the conference?
The Tanner Lecture at Cambridge University, yes. And so it was a conference and a lecture there where they had respondents.
And that's the conference where, as I said, so you in action, shaping that space that you're referring to even farther and much more explicit. So I think from your own side, you're creating that space. We're trying to create that space with our group and others. Yeah. And they are slowly merging. We're slowly getting viral.
Yeah.
So my second question is also very much related to your answer, Senai. This is, of course, one of the most beautiful elements of the book is the way that you describe where you are now and where you came from has something to do with where you are now, your personal story. And I think, Senai, that is also very important to you. So I just wonder whether the two of you could just exchange a bit more. So they started already with your presentation, but there's so much more to hear.
I'll just start by saying Sanai's response. I've been on the road for 2.5 weeks now. This is maybe the 15th stop, but that was the most profound and rewarding response to hear because it was really taking some of the ideas and applying it to the local, the national context. And so it was really, for me, a highlight now of this whole experience is really seeing and knowing that there are 96 more ideas in your list, which I'm sure you'll send. Oh, exactly.
I'll send it.
But I will say the first talk that I saw of yours was, I don't know who was the host, but you started the talk by talking about your family background and then connecting it to your motivations for AI. And so in that way, there's a lot of parallel where I think in academia we're taught, that we take off the personal, the subjective, in order to be, considered legitimate as scholars. We have a sort of distance from our work. And so I'm in the tradition, the Black radical tradition, coming from both Black feminists, that some of which the poets that I refer to, but also thinking about W.E.B. Du Bois, who, said that I can't be a calm, cool, and detached scientist while Negroes are being lynched, murdered, and starved. And so it's this idea that even if you look at Du Bois's trajectory, he was also experimenting with the arts, with science fiction, with short stories, with poetry, even as he was creating these huge field surveys and empirical work as a scientist, and then also as an advocate, being blacklisted, labeled a communist. So we have this tradition where people don't have to take off on hats. You're like, I used to read that story as a kid where the guy had all of the hats on. Hats for sale, hats for sale. And so it's like you can do multiple things, I think, and carving out space for us to bring our whole selves and also our anger and emotion and hopefulness to the work. And so the last thing I'll say around this is thinking about where I come from, thinking about the personal stories that I share in the book. You're going to see a lot of anger there. There are a lot of F-bombs in the book. There would be more F-bombs, but my mom read it and she said, please take out some of these fucks, please. I had so many more fucks to give. But it's because of the anger around a lot of these issues. But so for me, the book was a part of the process was metabolizing that anger and creating knowledge out of that anger. And so that's part of the invitation for you to use your emotions as fuel in your work, not to feel that you have to suppress it or put it to the side or, camouflage it in all of the ways that we do.
Anger?
Well, yes, anger. But in a different way. Mm-hmm. So I think it was around 2014, 2015 when I started to engage publicly with what I do professionally, but also with my personal experiences of being a former asylum seeker, refugee, being part of the Eritrean communities. And it was not my professional experiences or interests that drove me to go into public, mm-hmm. or drove me to go into public and engage more with myself and my professional and blend all those things was the experience of the new wave of refugees coming from Eritrea to Europe. Yeah. My parents fled the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea in 1979. They fled the war because of the oppression they experienced by the Ethiopians against Eritreans. Mm-hmm. So my parents, my generation, fled for the war, the oppression by the Ethiopians. Mm-hmm. Now in Eritrea, there is a completely different situation. The oppressed of then are the oppressors of now. So Eritreans, the asylum seekers now, are fleeing for their own authorities. In the Netherlands, people still live under the impression that the Ethiopians are the enemies. Well, currently, it's the own community, it's the own authority, it's the own regime. So when that wave of refugees started to come in 2015, a lot of Eritrean friends of mine who grew up in the Netherlands, not knowing the situation there or knowing it but not appreciating it, started to suppress their own fellow Eritreans that just came from Eritrea. That was a new level of injustice, oppression within oppression, that brought anger in me. That triggered me to go public, not only with my own personal experiences, but also with my professional experiences. And at some point, they started to blend. And I ended up here. So yes, in a way, anger, although I would say perhaps more disappointment than anger, that triggered me. So yes, anger and disappointment. Emotions, the real emotions inside, those are important to listen to and appreciate.
That is also a wonderful transition to my next question, which is, you also spoke about this, Senai, in a way, the comparison between the United States maybe and the European situation. So, as you said, lots of people say these things are special to the United States, or maybe they say these are special to Europe. So what can we learn from each other? What is there to learn beyond, to say, pointing fingers at each other?
So the first time I went to the US was in 1996 for my master thesis project. And I prepared by reading the book Race Matters.
Cornell.
Cornell West. I was shocked to arrive at the US and to see such a clear segregation. I did part of my PhD and my master's at Yale University in New Haven, and there was just one street that separated the poor black from the rich white. That was a shock to me, and I think that also created a feeling that I would never like to work in the US and live in the US. Now, the but is that things are changing in Europe. In many ways, as I said, Europe is becoming like the US. We've got now black schools versus white schools, segregation within towns, within certain areas and other areas. I think we should not underestimate and learn a lot from what is happening in the US, and also learn a lot of how they're dealing with it. So that's why I think viral justice has a lot to offer to us. Saying it's the States, it's another continent, it's not going to help us.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think about learning, I just think about the fact that the powers that be, the people who are trying to mastermind the breaking of society are sharing knowledge and tools and resources. And so part of it is that's a very transnational, collaborative war against society that we should be as collaborative, if not more, and in solidaristic and be learning from each other. And I think it goes far beyond the US and Europe, but to decenter these two places to begin with and to look elsewhere, I think is a starting point. One of the examples that I referenced early in the book is Chile, which in the last year and a half has been undergoing a transformation around its constitution led by indigenous communities, where the head of the Constitutional Committee is a professor of the humanities. Can you imagine? At the helm of reconstituting the whole society. And it's really transformative in terms of the types of rights that go well beyond our kind of narrow understanding of rights in the US and Europe, but thinking about the earth as having rights, thinking about future generations as having rights. What do we do now for those rights, 7 generations ahead? And so I think part of the learning has to actually not be just this cross current across the Atlantic, but to think really in terms of a planetary consciousness to save this planet and all of the living things on it, not just the humans. And we can learn from places that are often not looked to as the source and the direction, because our societies clearly don't know what they're doing. And so I feel like both the indigenous communities and the African communities within our societies, but also looking elsewhere to decenter the West and Europe. So.
Great. And now I need to come back to the other book, The Race After Technology. Sorry, we have to do this. I should also say my title is actually Humanities and AI, so it's just no escaping this. So how would you link your current work? I think at the very end of the book, you have a passage there about a discussion with an engineer or a data scientist at some conference or Zoom event. And you reference there automated racism again. So what is the link to the previous work here?
Yeah, so you can think of race after technology as one way to think about what I'm doing there is opening up the black box of AI and of technology, or the anti-black box of these fields, and trying to show the social and historical dimensions of something that is sold to us as neutral and objective. For viral justice, I'm approaching it not just opening up technology, but opening up education and work and healthcare and science. And so each chapter is taking a slice of our social lives and looking at the social and historical anti-Blackness that has brought us to the present, and then essentially excavating and shining a light on so many different individuals, groups, and initiatives that are working both to uproot that and also to plant something else. And so there's these twin sort of strands throughout the book in which the people, the insights that I'm highlighting are both about dismantling and taking down what's killing us, but also fostering and seeding and growing and watering the things that will ennoble us. And so that's a kind of much more expansive approach in viral justice. To the example you mentioned there, it's one of those short little anecdotes that brings to life this just shift in focus where I'm on a Zoom call. So first thing I think, there's a preface to the story that I tell in the book. Sean and I, at the beginning of COVID, one of the things we did in the early weeks was do like this Zoom storytelling for kids around the world. So we went to our local bookstore and chose stories. And the first day that we were scheduled to live stream the stories, right at the very end, the last story, we were Zoom bombed with this white man who took over the screen and flashed the kids who were there. Not completely flashed. It was like a cartoon of a man with a thong. And then we were like, what is this? Is it a prank? And then he said the N-word over and over and over. And so we scrambled 30 seconds, tried to stop it. It was one of the first documented cases of Zoom bombing because all of this news media then contacted us, and I don't even know if the term had been coined within that week. So that's like one end of the book. I mean, like bookending the story. And then towards the end, I share how I was on a Zoom conference in a breakout group, and this young data scientist, high schooler even, who kind of like a prodigy, we were in a breakout group together, and he realized, oh, wait, you're Ruha. And then he picks up his book on Race After Technology. He's like, oh my God, I'm reading your book. I'm applying it, da-da-da-da. And he sort of freaks out. And I was like, what's the opposite of Zoom bombing? And I went online to Twitter. I said, help me, find a word. What's the opposite of Zoom bombing? Because that's what that felt like. And so many people threw out really great terms. But then Eve Ewing, who was another sort of prolific sociologist, creative, Zoom blooming. So again, it's like this idea, it's like we need language to name what we want, not just what's hurting us. It's a very simple example, but it's also reflective of the shift from the title viral racism to viral justice, because as academics, we're so prolific. We have a vocabulary going to the ceiling to deconstruct and name all of the shit that's killing us. But then when we come and say, well, what's the alternative? What do we want? What do we want to grow? Our vocabulary is like a preschooler, right? So we have to grow the language, the naming, so that we can water and build the alternative society and worlds that we want to inhabit.
Amen.
Yeah, now to say that is of course excellent. Oh, I hate these things. So no, I like them. I hate nobody. Anyway, so that's my final question before we can do some audience questions. So get them ready, please. Is basically because your subtitle is of course how we grow the world we want. So what's the world we want?
The world we want is one in which a professor does not tell us the world we want. So again, it's thinking about how to do this in a participatory, empowering, democratic, expansive, diffusive way, not a top-down way, because we can create our own hierarchies of knowledge in which a handful of experts are convened in a committee somewhere in Geneva or wherever, and then tells the world, this is what we need to do. And so precisely the examples that I'm giving are showing such a wide variety and spectrum from locales in so many different places, so many different approaches, from mutual aid to protest, to institution building, to changing, everyday practices in families and neighborhoods and communities. And so part of it is an invitation for us to figure that out together, not to be prescribed that by one individual or a committee.
Yeah, I can't talk this. So this is exactly what we're doing. We've got a new Horizon Europe project. It's called Community, and it's about scaling down and scaling up.
Yes.
Scaling down and scaling up. Empowering people, including them in the co-creation process, so that they form their own new digital physical world. Ownership. Taking ownership, people that have ownership, people that have the tools to use their ownership and create a new world. What the world will be, we will see. But the more people engage in creating the world, the better.
Okay. So the more people we engage, the better. Perfect transition. So please, we have a microphone too, or you can just speak up.
How do y'all balance wearing so many hats? Because I'm so tired, it gets heavy,
For me, it's really about the team. So a lot of the hats are people around me that are working with me in my lab, for example, the staff and the students. Because the thing about it is when you really create an environment where people take ownership, that decenters you. That means that you don't have to do everything because the people around you feel empowered to do it, right? So it's actually quite liberating, and it can foster more restfulness. And so in the chapter on work, for example, which is called Grind, I talk about all of the many different ways in which labor conditions are exploitative, from academia to Amazon, and the similarities between these different varying contexts. But I end the chapter really thinking about how it's not just better work conditions that we want to foster, but we want to really prioritize rest and recuperation and being off. And there's a recent book that actually published same day as mine called, oh my gosh, it's been on the road, Rest as Resistance. I'm sure you all have heard of it, which I actually engage in viral justice. But it's really thinking about what do we need to change in our own sort of institutions to foster that ability, because it's not just something an individual can only decide, because there's penalties associated with, really reclaiming our time, as, Representative Waters would say. But thinking about what can change in our, both culturally, as that book is trying to do, but also our institutions in terms of labor. But for me, practically speaking, it really is about teamwork making the dream work, and really being able to rely on other people. Now, for example, knowing I was going to be on the road for a month, setting things up where students feel empowered to carry on the work. We don't have to meet every week. They don't have to check in with me. They have what they need, the associate director. So that's just one example in one context where we'd have to delegate and empower. Mm-hmm.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your thought and for your. Sorry for my accent and my English, because I'm French, and French people in English. But anyway, I found it very interesting what you was talking about an approach from the people and about co-constructing all of this. But do we really have the time? Because right now, for example, with climate change, but not because sometimes I'm a little bit annoyed when people are saying, "Oh, climate change." Well, exploitation has been for centuries, and a lot of people right now who are saying, "Oh my God, capitalism is horrible," or only thinking about climate change and not about all the exploitation. Anyway, but for example, I have some communist friends, and I'm close to them, but they are talking about the elites and from the elites party saying, "Well, we are going to do that," and I agree that is not the good solution, but maybe we have to focus on one objective and just not letting all the people decide. I don't know if what your reflection about it. Thank you.
Yeah. Huh? I mean, I think what you were saying at the end is where I landed at the end of the book, because it's the question of not trying to do everything. But the question that I posed here was, where is your plot? Where do you want to focus your energy so that you don't feel so pulled in different directions? But in doing so, it's not an individualistic endeavor. It's thinking about who you want to work with on one thing. And some people can have the capacity to do more, but really it's a question of thinking about, where do you want to invest your energies? Because the way that I see it is that the multiple crises that we face have been produced through so many different channels and avenues and tentacles, top down, sideways, bottom up. Anywhere we look, we can see evidence of the crisis, which in some ways can be quite immobilizing. But in my view, it means that no matter where we are, no matter what we're working on, there's a way to contribute to world building. But it's not going to necessarily feel like this big grand thing because we're working on this. So if you're a teacher, what does that look like? Your plot is the classroom, is the curriculum, thinking about the inequalities right underfoot. If you're in healthcare, if you're working, if you're a stay-at-home parent, in my view, the sandbox, the playground is ground zero for so many of the world building things we have to do, because that's when we're first acculturating and socializing the next generation. And so the things that we allow to happen or don't foster when people are 3 and 4 and 5 years old, that has massive ripple effects. But too often that's dismissed as you're not doing a real job, And so really thinking and revaluing all of the multiple things that people do, just living their lives, like not necessarily adding some huge new campaign or initiative. Some people have the capacity for that, but not everyone, not many people who are just trying to stay afloat. But even in trying to stay afloat, there's a way that we can bring others with us and think about what that looks like. And so it's really an invitation to think about what you care most about and what you want to contribute to, and just reinvigorate you to do that work, not to add a lot to your plate.
But also be yourself. Just be yourself. That's what I tell my kids.
Yes.
If you want to go and study, study. If you want to go do something else, do something else. I was brought up under the expectation that, like my parents, like their parents, you should go to school and study in order to make your future. And I'm telling my kids, be happy, find yourself, and in a way it's finding that plot. But I think before finding that plot, there's also find yourself. Don't. It's tough, I know, with this pressure from the outside, social media and so on. But that's exactly why it's important to keep saying to those around you, be happy.
Yes.
Don't look, be happy. Once you're happy, start looking for your plot. Be authentic, be yourself. That's so valuable.
Thanks for both your talks. I thought they were very inspiring, very contagious, in a way, emotionally contagious, the aspect of hope and anger. And I guess that's my question. How does change happen? Is that a matter of emotional contagion, or what are the kind of, how do you think that, what is the mechanism of change? What is the essence of that? How do you conceive of that?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question that likely has many different answers, both what people call theories of change, but I think a lot of them are not just theories, thinking about the pragmatics and the principles as well. One way I start that sort of mental exercises to think about what has changed me and how. So that's why I go to memoir, is to try to excavate what has impacted me for better or worse, right? And so part of that excavation to think about, how did this happen? How did that happen? What were the catalysts for different, both intellectual but also emotional and spiritual changes over my lifetime? And one of the things, again, there are many different ways to reflect on that, but one of the things that I'm trying to both think about in the book and model in sharing and talking about it is that when we want to generate more justice and joy in the world, we have to make it attractive. It can't just be at the level of critique and the level of to show you the negative X-ray. That's important. It has to be there. But it also has to be like, this is the negative X-ray. So now how do we reinvigorate this body? How do we breathe life into it? How do we make it attractive so that you want to breathe the same air I breathe, right? And so the idea of conspire, is breathing together, right? And so how do we make that so that more people want to participate? So it's not just, again, I'm thinking about the way that I've often taught my intro to race classes, which is my goal is not to make you the racism police so that you go out and you're looking for the racism and you're ready to, this is the racism in your family and that to me, one, it's disingenuous. Because whatever we think we know now that makes us feel so self-righteous, we didn't always know. Someone took time to teach us that. And so part of it is an intellectual humility about the fact that we didn't always know what we know. So it's like the pedagogy. How do you bring someone into that knowledge that's attractive, that recognizing it's okay that you don't know. It's okay that you haven't done this before. It's about growth. And so part of it is to really approach things with that idea that, we are in this together. I'm not trying to beat you over the head with knowledge because that never changes. Is that how any of us awaken to anything? No, it's not because someone beat us over the head with it. And so I think that, again, thinking about our own process of growth and learning and then creating spaces and relationships that will allow that to foster, I think that's one way of thinking about making things attractive, making people want to breathe the same air and move with us.
Perhaps one thing to add to that. I often, as you know, refer to Paulo Freire. And his work is so amazing. And so there are these two cycles that he describes. The cycle of socialization, or the cycle of oppression, as he says, but there's also a cycle of liberation. And he shows theoretically, but also in practice, how you either stay in this cycle of oppression and expectation, and what it takes to go out of this cycle of oppression and go into the cycle of liberation, which is, the cycle of liberation is all about co-creation. It's all about how do we think things together. So these theories, but also these practices, have been there for a long time, but we don't recognize them or we don't value them enough. Now is the time, perhaps again, to consider them, to learn from them, not to reinvent again how to bring about change, but to look back to the past. How did it happen? What can we learn from it? Right? So perhaps that's one pointer for you to consider.
Yeah, I love that.
I think there was a question next to you. Gentleman who's now typing this. You had a question also, right?
Yes, sort of, but I was a bit unsure because I don't. Oh, sorry. Okay, first of all, I want to say that I'm like very emotional right now, so I'm sorry for however this comes out. And the reason why I wasn't so sure to make this question was because I'm all for everything that you're saying. I love it. I feel like going out that door and just just like starting, just like finding my plot and starting my garden. But there is something that that I feel I fear a lot, and I really sometimes it's like this big cloud over my garden, and that is that, you know, I research activism, and I am always very inspired to see just like how fervent is people's desire to make, you know, the world a better place. But at the same time, there are these really powerful people, and I think you also mentioned them, you know, that there's sort of like this almost transnational collaboration of sort of like destroying society, and they are, you know, like having these exclusive meetings. They're in their like fancy meeting room, and they are these executives or these politicians, and they have their fancy pens, and they sign, you know, like their budgets, and I feel like these people, I cannot somehow, like I can tend to our garden and to my community, but at the same time these people are still doing what they're doing, and so I just feel like there's this tension I can't, or like this fear that I cannot get rid of. And I would just I'm just curious to hear what you do with those kind of thoughts.
Yeah, which I have all the time. I think for me, the place that I go to push through that sense of defeat, you know, like preemptive defeat, is that I put myself in the shoes of those who are living at the height of other world historical forms of oppression, whether it's settler colonialism or whether it's, you know, chattel slavery. And I think about people living at the height of these systems where similarly a small global elite were ruling the world, and their grandparents, their great-grandparents lived under this. There was no reason for them to believe that this system would ever come to an end. It was overshadowed everything. It was the cloud, right? And I think about where did they have to go? Thinking about the abolitionists at the height of slavery, or the anti-colonial fighters, you know, at the height of colonialism. Like, what reservoir did they have to pull from in order to wake up each day and think, you know what? Even though my great-grandmother was enslaved or colonized, I'm going to fight. I'm going to do this thing with my fellow, you know, fighters. And so part of it is to think about that sense of not knowing the end, but willing to spend one's own lifetime and hand the baton to the next generation to take it further. Not necessarily feeling like you are going to see the end of this thing, but feeling that nevertheless a responsibility to do your part, right? Because everything can be referenced back to Butler. One of the things that she says is, we can do anything if we can convince ourselves that it's been done before. We can do anything if we can convince ourselves it's been done before. But to me, it's not just convinced like in a sort of mystical way. Let us look at the history of people and movements and initiatives in order to see, wow, you know, they pushed it. They didn't even know that they were pushing, you know, and they were bringing this thing down, and they continue to do it and find that reservoir. And so part of it in the field of African American studies, we talk a lot about intellectual traditions or freedom traditions. And that idea of tradition, I think, is important because it's giving voice to this idea that you're part of something greater than yourself, and you have a responsibility to that tradition. And again, Baldwin would say, I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. To be a pessimist means that you've decided that human life is an academic matter. So I must fight I have to survive what I have to survive, right? And so that space of feeling really down, I think of Baldwin says, I'm being an academic now, right? I have to join arms, get my hands dirty. And I think part of not just studying them, but engaging it generates a kind of hopefulness. This idea, Miriam Cabo, which I reference in Race After Technology and throughout Viral Justice, that hope is a discipline. It's a practice. It's not a feeling that we just have to wait and hope, come. Hope is a practice and a discipline. So we have to generate it by what we do, not just what we study and what we think about, right? And for me, doing things actually gives me the energy and the momentum that I need.
Thank you. First of all, Ruha, I just wanted to say that, yes.
Yeah, you were hiding yourself behind this mask.
Well, partially.
Well, you were being very public healthy. Thank you for that. Oh my God, the voice is the same.
So first of all, I wanted to say that, I'm just really happy to see you thriving and doing so well. And I really appreciated the book. And I actually got the audiobook. And so I actually, basically had you reading it to me. And I think mentioning the fact that I read it via the audiobook is germane because it relates to the issue of disability, which I think is really relevant to the issues of virality that you are bringing up, especially in relation to the pandemic and the comment at the outset that one of the positive outcomes of the pandemic has been the ability for, more online communications and video conferencing. So, I do appreciate that. And so I think part of what I'm thinking about is, and I'm sorry, this is going to be a little bit multifactorial and convoluted perhaps, but, first of all, I was thinking that this book in a lot of ways reminds me of two other books. Insofar as I would call it a kind of sociological memoir. And so, one of the books that it makes me think of is Tressie McMillan Cotton's Thick, and then a book that, is 20 years old, your Princeton colleague Dalton Conley's Honky. And, I guess thinking about what is possible, I'm thinking also about Lamar Jarrell Bruce's How to Go Mad Without Losing Your Mind. And so I'm thinking about, where is the space for us to think about some of the issues that you are able to voice, which people can hear now, but didn't necessarily want to acknowledge before the pandemic. And I think that, especially in relation to issues of disability, that one of the things that a lot of disability activists have talked about, or disabled people have talked about, is just kind of a frustration with how so many of the lessons that, we knew people didn't want to listen to. And, I think something else that I've thought a lot about in terms of, who can speak and who can be heard and who gets silenced is, the issue of, who is seen as a legitimate academic or intellectual authority to be listened to. And I really appreciate the way that you address colorism in the book. And I also really appreciate the fact that, your last three books, including the edited edition, Captivating Technology, that you really make a point of foregrounding, darker-skinned Black people. And it's interesting because when I came here, and this is something I do all the time, I looked around to see, am I going to be the darkest person here? Because usually I am. And so, I think that that's actually really relevant in terms of what you discuss in the book and, how I know you and where we both are now, why I live in the Netherlands, why I don't live in the United States now. And, I'm already taking up a lot of time and I don't want to monopolize this moment, but I have a very, I think, outlier perspective. And one of the reasons that I, think about this book in companionship with Dalton Conley's is because, I, for a very long time, wanted to write a, quote, anthropological memoir, and actually told Dalton Conley this, in the immediate aftermath of him publishing his book. But I never really felt like I could do that. And I think the constraints around that also really speak to kind of the question that I have now about, what is possible, and why I referenced How to Go Mad Without Losing Your Mind, because I feel like who can really speak about certain subjects? And, it seems to me that so much of what can be said and what can be heard, especially within the context of the academy, requires a lot of survivor bias. And, requires you not to have had certain experiences and not to have been expunged from the academy in certain ways. And I really appreciate that, you talk about at different points in your life, how you didn't necessarily have the vocabulary to articulate, certain concepts, even if viscerally you kind of knew, something was going on. And so I guess, one of the things that I'm thinking about is around the language of white supremacy and anti-Blackness, you know, back when we were taking that ethnographic methods class together, the ways in which it wasn't really possible to articulate certain things, whereas it is now.
Yes.
And so, you know, I guess part of what I'm thinking about also is maybe if you could just sort of address some of those issues and the hegemony of writing in determining academic careers and how that impacts issues of disability.
I would love to. Thank you for all of those factors that were in there. I appreciate you so much. So you've already listened to the book, so you know, so I'll just say for others that one of the main through lines is really thinking about what we have to learn from disability justice scholars, activists, movements. And one of the points here is that so many of the awakenings that we were forced to have in light of COVID, that knowledge was already there. Those practices of care were already there, that were ignored precisely because they were delegitimized and they were seen as being marginal, not affecting everyone. And how quickly they have been re-marginalized as well as we have gone on and tried to get back to normal. And so part of it is that we are not learning the lessons that we should have. To the point about writing, one of the things I've been thinking about is whether I could have written this book at an earlier stage where already the more serious, respected, awarded scholarship was already there, right? And I don't know, it's an open question, whether if someone had given me the opportunity, whether I would have been brave enough or felt like willing to expose myself enough to engage in at this level of personal writing mixed in with the social commentary, precisely because of the feudalistic hierarchies that we have in the academy that rely upon people's vulnerability and precarity as the engine and the fuel so that our anxiety keeps the thing going. And so the question now is what I found, and it's more of a hypothesis, I'll say, is academic publishing is in crisis. If we hadn't known and guessed, that is most academic presses can't keep the lights on. The first press that I published was Stanford. We had to, you know, rally around. Stanford University was about to expunge them, right? And the academic press was not going to be able to survive. Many of us had to petition Duke, my edited volume. We had to write in and show support for Duke University Press so that they keep the lights, you know. So part of my hypothesis is precisely because of this crisis, the marketing, the viability. I have found, even with my own students who are starting their first book projects, that even one's first book has to have a wider audience than just one's field. So there's a pressure to make it more broadly speaking to more people. And within that shift, I am seeing more encouragement, invitation to bring in and weave in more of the personal. To think about how our personal experiences connect to our public commitments and our scholarship. One example recently and if you just go to my Twitter feed from the last couple of days, Duke just announced a new series co-edited by Alexis Pauling Gumbs and others. There's a few people on that editorial board. And the description of that, it's incredible. The mix of creative and you know, memoir and experimental. Basically, they're like, we don't know what we want. Let's just experiment, right? And so I think partly of the economic context, but partly they're seeing how well books that are experimenting and pushing the boundaries are doing. And so they want more of those. So I think it is a good moment to step into that space and to say that, well, look at, you know, we have to write the market statement and show what other books it's related to. Now we have more of those to reference, not just honky, not just a few, token examples, but there's more. And it's interesting that it seems to be Black women scholars in that space that are doing really interesting work. And so if you can't find the reference to that call for proposals for this new Duke series, for anyone who's interested, please reach out. But thank you for that.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you, and I just wanted to say to her that she's not the darkest person in the room.
Oh, we're gonna have a competition now, huh?
All right, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for the book. It's been thought-provoking. particularly because I return to my country tomorrow, having just spent a few days here. You had tried, I don't know if it was intentional, but there was a question about what is the world we would like to grow. And there was a reference made to Theresa May's immigration policy at some point. But if you were to ask her, she probably would think she was doing something good enough, good for our people, good enough for the UK. So as I think about this, is there a way to frame what will be the world would like to have? Otherwise, people may just split into the extremes, and that could leave. So I just like to know what your thoughts are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I give some voice to that in the book. I don't just leave it up for you to guess what I imagine, but really simply my go-to sort of framing or conception. I'm drawing from multiple sources, but one sociologist in particular, the late Eric Olin Wright, who wrote a book called Real Utopias, Imagining Real Utopias. And he talked about how we're trying to create a world in which everyone has broad access to the material and social goods to live a flourishing life. So that has widespread ramifications at the level of high policy to everyday practices. But it's really thinking in this expansive way about everyone having access to the social and material goods to live a flourishing life, where what we have now, in contrast, is an antisocial system. We don't have a society. We have an antisocial system where the very policies that should be producing housing, it's building scarcity. The very education policies that should be producing education are producing ignorance. The environmental policies are producing extinction. The tech policies are producing inequity. So in every way, we have the things that should be creating the contours for the generation of these material and social goods. They're doing quite the opposite, and not by accident, by design. Because the people who are designing it, they don't have to live in the commons. They are burrowed away, hiding away in their gated communities on their private jets with their private concierge doctors. They don't have to rely on the commons. So they are creating policies in which the commons is completely eroded at the level of policy and practice. And so this is one way to begin to think about how do we repopulate the commons and seed it so that it's flourishing, and in the meantime challenge at the very root the monopolization of power and resources that we see in the hands of the few.
Great final words, Sarah.
No, I'm not going to say anything on that. This is perhaps one last point, and that's to thank you for moderating.
Yes, please. Thank you, Tobias.
The book is available in the corner there, if you want to enjoy it. Otherwise, I wish you all a wonderful... We don't have drinks, do we know? I actually don't fully know. We don't have drinks, no?
Right, so we heard that there won't be drinks, so did you cancel?
Okay. Yeah. So you want somewhere else, please?
The one thing I'll say, I'll just be back there signing if anyone wants, but even if I've known you since I was 3, please write your name down so I can go relatively swiftly through it. It helps me quite a bit. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.